All right, well, we're continuing our Apologetics Series. So far, up to this point, we've covered a couple different topics, right? First week, I kind of gave an apologetic for apologetics, like, hey, church, this is why this is important, this is why you should do these things, right? If for no other reason, you should do it because, well, the Bible tells us we should do it, right? It's something that's kind of assumed about how we go about evangelism, that apologetics, that we're giving reasons for the hope that we have within us. We're contending for the faith, right? We are demolishing arguments in every stronghold that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, right? And then we spent some time talking about the existence of God, because when it comes to apologetics, when it comes to evangelism, the gospel, it does no good if this person doesn't believe that God doesn't exist. God, the existence of God, is a precondition to the gospel, right? God must be, right? There's no good news without God. So once we finished that up, gave you a few arguments, some of the common arguments, right? The cosmological argument, and there's kind of two versions there. There's a vertical view, which if the universe had a beginning, or if everything has a beginning, or anything that has a beginning must have a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore the universe has a cause. That's like the vertical argument, or is that horizontal? That's vertical. And then there's the argument from contingency, right? Horizontally. Rick kind of brought this up earlier during the Lord's Supper, right? Christ, the Word, holds all things together, right? It's not just that the existence of everything in the past had to have been caused by God, but our existence now, right? Right now, God is upholding you by His power. And I don't know about you, but at least for me, that is a comfort. That is a comfort to me. Not just because of the theoretical, like, wow, I'm continuing to exist, but that God's power is upholding me every moment of my being. Human emotion is an inferior analog to that, right? God is so close to you. He's upholding you by His very power. He knows everything about you, every moment of your existence, right? There might be some apologetic value there, but He's holding us in existence. We went over some other arguments. The moral argument, right? If objective moral values exist, then God must exist, right? So we went through that. The teleological argument, the argument from design, right? The fine-tuned nature of reality, arguing from the lesser to the greater. If something like a watch requires a designer, then how much more does the universe in its infinite complexity require a designer, right? So those are some of the arguments we looked at. And so what this does for us is it gives us, there are sound reasons to believe that God exists, right? Irrespective of what the Bible says, right? Right? God has revealed His divine power and invisible attributes to the things that have been made, right? Paul even writes about this in Acts 17, right? Speaking to those at the Areopagus, right? You worship this unknown God. I'm here to proclaim Him to you, right? And He's not far off, though men grope for Him that they might find Him, right? But it's through Him that we live and move and have our being. And so God exists, right? And there's many other arguments, reasonings, evidences that you can put forward that, like, the most reasonable thing to believe is to believe what all of humanity has believed for the last however many thousands of years, that there is something more than us, right? That this is not all there is. From there, it's, okay, God exists. How do we get to the God of the Bible, right? How do we get from God exists to God of the Bible? Because there's many arguments you can make about the existence of God, but which God? Which is the right religion, right? And so this is where the resurrection is key. But in order to talk about the resurrection, you have to talk about miracles. And so Lewis spent some time talking to us about miracles, right? The nature of miracles. That if you admit of God, then you must necessarily admit that miracles are possible, okay? if there's a supernatural God, if there's a personal God, then you must admit of the potential, the possibility of miracles. Okay? Once you have that, then you can go to the resurrection. Because the resurrection, if you don't believe in miracles, if you're a naturalist, right, an atheist, you're a secularist, you believe that matter is all there is, then you can't really talk about the resurrection, right? Because it's a miracle, right? Miracles they're excluded in that worldview, but you have God, you have miracles, and then we can pivot to the reliability of the text. Like, what does history seem to say? What can we know with historical certainty about Jesus, right? And there's many great books out there that talk about this. Lee Strobel has a great book called the Case for Christ, right? Is that Lee Strobel? Who's the one by gray hair guy? He was a detective. J. Warner Wallace. Cold Case Christianity is another one. He dives into like the text itself. Like, look at the text here, right? And there's many others. And these are more popular because there's other. William Lane Craig has done a lot of work on this. He has a PhD in New Testament studies and lots of stuff there. But once you have God, you have miracles, and then we talk about the reliability of the text. What can we know? And what is reasonable to believe about Jesus, right? And you establish the resurrection. Okay. So you get God, you get miracles, you get the resurrection. You're a Christian now, right? Presumably, okay? What else? Well, that's what the rest of the study is going to be about, right? What are some of the harder questions? What are some of the nuanced questions, or what clarifications can we make about Christianity as we deal with various questions that we have, various doubts that people run into? And one of the biggest ones is the problem of evil. Okay? Does God make sense in a world full of suffering? Now, I would say there's two sources of this problem. And forgive me if I'm not going to be super philosophically precise, but we just got to talk about this in certain ways. There's two sources of the problem. There's two kinds of evil, if you will, that we observe and experience in the world. You have moral evil, right? This is the one that most of us easily recognize. It's evil done, right? Via human agency, right? This is the murderer. This is the liar, the rapist, right? People doing things they should not do, right? Moral evil. We recognize that, okay? Just flip on the news if you want to see all the moral evil that's going on in the world around you, right? Or maybe look into your own heart. But moral evil, evil done, right? This is by human agents. Then we have what might be called natural evil, okay? And all I mean by natural evil is this is evil that's suffered by, let's say, natural disasters, natural physical law, right? Tsunamis, earthquakes, tornadoes, right? Lots of people die from these things. Brain tumors, terminal diseases, genetic abnormalities, stuff like that. These aren't things that any one person has done, though I suppose if you're into climate control and like maybe the government's causing tornado, I don't know, but put on your tinfoil hat. But for the most, natural disasters, these things, they happen. And we can see the devastating results. We go, that's terrible. That should not be, right? All these people died, or all these people are suffering, or whatever it is, right? We had, the hurricanes last year, right? Up in the Asheville area and up there, right? Tammy, you went up there and was helping with some of the relief, and it's crazy. Houses, entire towns, just washed away. Like, God, where were you? What is this? Why is this happening, right? So natural evil. So moral evil, that's evil done. Natural evil, evil suffered. And so I think it's important to draw out these distinctions, because when you're talking about evil, what kind is it? Is this something by a human agent? Is this something because of the universe? Like we live in a universe with natural physical laws that have consequences? Beyond that, I want to consider this question, the problem of evil, from two different perspectives. That is, There's an intellectual aspect of it, right? There's a wrestling in the mind of it. We observe evil, we see it, and it causes us to contemplate, right, the nature of this thing. Like, what is this? Why is this, right? And then you have the pastoral/practical aspect, okay? We ourselves are the subjects of this question, right? Why is there suffering in the world? Why is there evil? No. We ourselves are the subjects of this question because we are the ones who are experience it. We are the ones who are suffering it, right? And it's a very complex question. There isn't a simple answer for each and every situation. I think specific, occasions of evil, right, need to be looked at on their own merits, right, on their own situations. But I think that we can at least develop some type of foundation for approaching this question, right? Does God make sense in a world full of suffering? It's not helpful to each other, it's not helpful to others if we just pretend, as some worldviews do, that evil's not a thing, or that it's not something to think about, or something to be bothered with. I think we need to grapple with this question. And so, before we get into it, I want to start by highlighting a few different reasons for why this question, the question of evil, is an important one. Peter Kraft has a book called A Handbook to Christian Apologetics, and he writes this, and this is the same author, so that's what he looks like, guys, for our book study that we're doing. There he is. I wrote him an email once, and he replied back. It was like a very short thing. I was like, wow, he actually wrote back. And I was like, wow, he doesn't care about me. At least he wrote back, though. Like, who's this guy who is this emailing me out of nowhere? Like, I didn't even know if his email would work. I was asking him questions about this book, like other additional resources. And he's like, I have nothing, but if you want to make it, then go ahead. I'm sure it'd be helpful. It's like, okay, thanks. He writes this in his book. The problem of evil is uniquely important for three very serious reasons. First, it is the apparent proof of atheism. There are many proofs or apparent proofs of theism, right? But there's only one argument that even claims to prove there is no God. A second reason why the problem of evil is uniquely important is because it is universal. Everyone wonders why bad things happen to good people. Some wonder why bad things happen at all. Thirdly, and most importantly, the problem of evil is not merely a theoretical problem, but an intensely practical one. It is not merely the alienation between two concepts, God and evil, but the alienation between a little child and her father when she looks up through tears and asks, "Why did you let me hurt so bad?" The heart of the problem is not found in words like ours in a book, but in the words from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It is a problem not on paper, but on wood. What Dr. Crave is bringing out here is there's these various reasons for why this problem is important. Namely, the first, it's elsewhere he's written he wrote it here and elsewhere there's only really one argument that the Christian has to deal with, right? And it's the problem of evil, right? And so there's a logical problem. It's the existence of God and the reality of evil, are those compatible concepts, right? If God exists, why evil, right? The atheist or the secularist or whatever might argue that because there is evil, there is no God, okay? And we'll dive into that in a bit. But there's a logical problem, okay? How can we reconcile the existence of a all-powerful, all-good, all-loving God with the reality of evil? The second significance is that it is a universal reality. right? The presence of evil around us is universally observed and is undeniable. That suffering is a fact of human existence. And because of this, we have to deal with it. We have to grapple with it. It's not an illusion or something we can ignore. And all worldviews try to explain it, right? By either denying its reality or explaining it away as meaningless, right? We all have, or we all have experienced evil and suffering, or we will in this life. And ultimately, we're all going to die, right? That great evil, the great enemy, death, will come for us all. So I think we have to come to terms with this issue because of its universality, right? It is common human experience. Lastly, it is existentially felt. We are the subjects of this. We suffer. There is a physical, emotional, psychological toll on the human person who suffers, right? That causes them to ask, why? Why must things be this way? Why must things hurt so bad? Why? So first, I'd like to dive into the logical problem. Okay? What is the logical problem? Well, it stems from this question: is the existence of God and the presence of evil compatible? Does God make sense in a world full of suffering? Doesn't the presence of evil in the world disprove God, since an all-loving and all-powerful God would do away with such evil and suffering? This problem goes way back, okay? Here's a quote. It's attributed to Epicurus, cited by David Hume in his dialogues concerning natural religion. He writes this: "Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God?" That's the problem, right? As Christians, we believe in this all-good, all-loving, all-powerful God, yet there is evil. It raises questions. And so to kind of formalize the argument, I'm just going to list it out here how it might be framed, okay? If God is all good, then he would desire an end to all evil and suffering. If God is all-powerful, then he would have the means to end all evil and suffering. Evil and suffering yet continue. Okay? Take these things together. God's all good, then he would want evil to end, right? He'd have the desire, he'd have the will for it to be ended, right? If he's all-powerful, then presumably he would have the means to do that. He has the power to end all evil. But there's evil. Okay? So how do we explain that? Well, so goes the atheist or the naturalist. Therefore, either one, God does not desire to end all evil and suffering, though he has the means to do it. If that's the case, then this God is not the God I want to worship. He would be malevolent, right? If he has no desire to end evil and suffering, then what kind of God is that? He's not omnibenevolent. So that means he's not all good. Or either God desires to end all suffering, but he does not have the means to do it. Then he's not all-powerful. Again, who is this God who created everything yet can't end evil? Or lastly, maybe God doesn't exist at all, right? So either the God exists is not the God we worship, or God does not exist at all. So the solution here is it's not that complicated. And I bet many of you might have an idea of how you would answer this problem. Actually, why don't we just open up to everybody? You have mics out there? What do you guys think of this problem, this logical problem of evil? Anybody have any input, any comments? Rick? Hold on. Wait for the mic.
My name is not Mike.
Okay.
So I struggle a little bit with using evil and suffering as synonyms.
Sure.
Because, a child born with spina bifida, is that evil? It is suffering.
Yeah.
But, because evil has this moral overtone to it, whereas suffering doesn't require the moral overtone. So what do you think about that?
I agree with you completely. And that's why in the beginning, we'll talk more about this in a bit, why I brought out the distinction between moral evil, right, and natural evil, right? Things that just happen as a result of the world that we live in, right? People die from tornadoes because they live in an area where tornadoes happen. That's why, right? But I'll explain why it's called natural evil. We're going to take a look just briefly at the nature of evil itself in a little bit. But no, I am 100%, I'm tracking with you on that. It's just, again, it's very difficult to be maybe philosophically precise with some of the stuff. And so I don't have time to organize my thoughts in a way that would do that. So, if I'm a little bit loose on things in terms of, not being super precise, then, it's just the nature of the issue. But, Avian?
I was just thinking, so God is both all good and all powerful, but it's not necessarily always good to use power. And because if he did do that, that would necessarily end our free will, and that would not be good.
That's great. You nailed it. At least that is it. Yeah, we're going to actually talk a lot about that in a bit. Yeah, so I like how you framed that. God is all good, and he is all powerful, but it's not always good for God to use all his power all the time, right? Because maybe if God ended all evil and suffering now, maybe that would be a world without you in it. No, that's great. Any other comments?
Just to continue on that, I think it is a very human perception to think of God's goodness as being, we need to experience that goodness, and we need to have this only good, no bad in our lives, thinking that that's an expression of God's goodness. And, I think of some of the messaging that comes out of communist China that, they will not allow negative things to go into the press, and it has to be everything expressed very positively, and thinking that there is a facade of positive, a facade of good, but, to anyone who has any more details, knowing that the situation is not as it's perceived, and so the idea that we think that, if there's good and bad in the world, then the place we need to be is with the good and not with the bad, as if that was the only place that we can experience, So, and I think that's going to tie into free will.
That's great. Yeah. Are you raising your hand, Jan? Oh, no, you're just... Anybody else? Tammy?
Well, the thing is, he has ended all evil and suffering ultimately. But
right.
He's given us free will, so there's a time to when that actually happens.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's That's it. I think you and Avian basically answered the major question, so I don't have to teach anymore. But no, you got it, right? The answer to the logical problem of evil, there's a couple of different answers. We'll talk about your answer in a little bit. But Tammy is basically saying that this is not the whole story, right? This life that we have now is not the whole story. We have a bit more of the story than some people do, right? We look at this and go, well, yes, I agree that God is all good, and I believe that God is all powerful, right? And I recognize that, there is evil, but because God is all good and God is all powerful, He will end evil someday, right? Since God is all good and all powerful, evil will be defeated, and suffering will end someday. Their defeat is guaranteed by the nature of an all good and all powerful God. Okay? So, yes, there is evil in the world. And God will end it someday. Read the last 3 chapters of Revelation to learn a little bit about how He's going to deal with that. Christianity gives an explanation for the presence of evil. And it gives the expectation and the sure hope that evil will one day be destroyed. So, I think that this, for the most part, deals with the logical problem, okay? The reality of evil and the existence of God are not incompatible, logically speaking, right? But there's still other questions. It's like, okay, this explains, how it can be that there can be God and evil, but not why, right? And this kind of gets into the next 2 areas. Another significance of the problem of evil is that it is a universal reality. Okay? The pervasive presence and experience of evil extends to all places and times and cultures. And it compels us to wrestle with this question, right? Why? What's the purpose? What's the point, right? And there's various responses to the reality of evil, right? The secularist or the atheist might say, look at all this evil, what more proof do you need that there is no God at all or that He doesn't care? Whereas maybe pantheists or some more Eastern New Age or whatever, Eastern religions, they might say, well, evil is an illusion, right? Don't believe your lying eyes, kind of thing. Some might say, well, this thing happened, this evil thing happened, it's a judgment from God, right? Now, we don't have time to answer all those kinds of little side questions. But what I do want to bring out is that removing God undermines the force of the problem. Suppose we remove God from the story altogether. Like, we all experience evil, we all suffer, we all suggest that this or that or the other is not the way that it should be. Okay. Let's suppose then we just remove God. Take God out of it. I submit to you that raises more problems for us concerning the idea of evil. What happens if God is eliminated? Suppose, just fill in the blank here. Where was God when blank happened? Oh, I guess He wasn't there because He doesn't exist. Problem solved, right? Is it solved? No. If there is no God, then from whence does your complaint arise? Okay? If there is no God, there is no objective basis for right and wrong. There is no basis for good. Okay? There is no basis for this ought to be this way, or this should not be this way. There's no hope. And so, if there's no God, then there's no good, then there's no basis for your complaint against all the evil in the world. You cannot, on the one hand, reject the very foundation for good that allows us to recognize evil, then on the other hand, complain about all the evil. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so most people who bring up this question about the problem of evil, they're not being consistent. They're not being consistent. Okay? Removing God undermines the force of the complaint. I'm not saying that deals with the existential angst, right? And the emotion and the difficulty it is to go through these things, but it removes the force of the argument. And so, in the end, I think the universality of the experience of evil, of suffering, points us towards something beyond ourselves. Going back to Peter Kreeft, he writes in his book, Handbook of Christian Apologetics, the fact that we do not naturally accept this world full of injustice, suffering, sin, disease, and death, that we spontaneously cheer the poet, Dylan Thomas, when he says, so irrationally yet nobly, do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. The very fact of our outrage at evil is a clue that we are in touch with a standard of goodness by which we judge this world as defective, as falling drastically short of the mark. You guys following? Like, why do we react so strongly to these supposed injustices in the world, these supposed evils in the world, unless there actually is something good, and there is something truly just, objectively just, right? This is one of the things that brought C.S. Lewis to the faith. He writes, my argument against, this is in Mere Christianity, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? I found I was forced to assume that one part of reality, namely the idea of justice, was full of sense. If the whole universe has no meaning, we should never have found out that it has no meaning, just as if there was no light in the universe and therefore no creatures with eyes, we should have never known that it was dark. Dark would be without meaning. Do you see Lewis's point here? Do you see Christ's point here? That just as we go through this exercise of why all this evil, why all this suffering, that itself points to something greater, right? It points to an objective standard. It points to this world is not the way it was meant to be, or is not the way that it should be. There is something good. There is something right. There's something above this world that we must appeal to if we are to say that things should not be this way. Right? And so what this should do is it should compel us to go, okay, well, what is it? Why do I react? Why does humanity react this way towards evil? Why is there this universality recognizing that this world is messed up? Right? Why is that? Lewis, in The Problem of Pain, answers it partly. He says, we could ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It removes the veil. It plants the flag of truth within the fortress of the rebel soul. And so Lewis he was of the mind that, pain, the problem of pain, evil, suffering, these things point us to something greater. It is, God even uses these things to rouse us, as it were, right? To plant the flag of truth, to search. There must be something more than this world full of suffering. There must be something greater. There are some observations I want to make about the nature of evil, if we can say it has a nature, right? And this kind of goes into what you're talking about earlier, Rick. Evil may sound shocking to you. Just bear with me. Hang on, okay? Evil is not a thing in of itself. Now, I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not saying it's an illusion, right? I'm not saying that all suffering is an illusion because of desire. If you stop desiring things, then you wouldn't have any suffering, right? What I mean is this, is that evil does not have its own existence. Show me, does anybody have a blob of evil in their pocket? Hold it out. Here you go. Here's the blob of evil, right? It does not have its own existence. What it is, it's a privation, that's the technical philosophical term, or a corruption of good, right? God created things in the beginning, and it was all good, right? He made things after their kinds in the ways that they should be, the ways they should go, the kinds of things that they are, right? And it was good, right? He made men to be a certain way, to have a relationship with him. He made the creatures of the earth to be a certain way, right? That it was good, right? So because there is a God, we can say that there is a way that things ought to be. When they're not that way, that is evil, okay? So evil is a corruption of good, right? It has no existence in of itself, right? It is a corruption. So evil to the eye is blindness, right? Well, because an eye should have sight, right? Man is made to relate to God by faith, to rest in him, to trust in him, to worship him, right? And so when we don't do those things, when we don't relate to God that way, that is an evil, right? It goes against the way that God intended for us to be. And so I say all that to say, so when we go back to like natural evil, right? The tornadoes, the earthquakes, like these are things, and we could really get into the ways, well, were there tornadoes and earthquakes and stuff before the fall, right? I mean, are these things directly a result of the fall? Maybe, right? But God made a physical universe, right? According to physical laws, for it to operate, we're not just material, right? We're our soul, body, unities, right? But we have flesh, right? And you know what? I don't know. I'm not going to go through this, okay? Right? There are consequences to having a physical body, right? I go out, drive my car, I get T-boned. There's consequences. Is that evil? Well, it's not a moral evil, right? But it's my life, right? Maybe my life's destroyed. Maybe I'm dead, right? It's a tragic thing, right? Maybe, I hope. Maybe Lewis might not think so, but I know. I love Lewis. Lewis loves me. But it's we can edit that out, right, Caleb? So while like natural disasters and things of the sort, tragedies, they're not morally evil, they are things that they destroy, right? They destroy. And we go, that should not be that way, right? Evil overall expresses that things are not the way they are supposed to be, and thus presupposes that there is a way that things are supposed to be, that is the good. So all of that, the point of all that is to say that the universality of the experience of evil and suffering points to something more foundation, points to the good, right? The good that God provided. All right, I got to start wrapping things up here. Last piece, and probably the most difficult, I would say. We are the subjects of this suffering. We are the ones going through it, right? And so naturally, the question rises, why does God allow evil to happen? Why does the little girl get mutilated by the rapist? Why do innumerable people suffer and die horrific deaths? Why does the horrific car accident happen? Why do bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? If you've had those questions, you're not alone, okay? Even the biblical authors raise these same kind of questions. In Jeremiah 12, why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all the faithless live at ease? You have planted them and they have taken root. They grow and bear fruit. You are always on their lips, but far from their hearts. Job, why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For sighing has become my daily food. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil. Lamentations. I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of the Lord's wrath. He has driven me away and made me walk in darkness rather than light. Indeed, he has turned his hand against me again and again all day long. Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from my cries of anguish. My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer. By night, but I find no rest. Why all this, right? Even the biblical authors, they felt it as well, right? They felt it as well. We can't get into all the little rabbit trails that can come out of this, but there's two main aspects I want to consider. The number one is human freedom. Ambian brought this up earlier. God made us free. He didn't make us to be robots or animals. And so, you cannot have humans without human freedom. Part of what it is to be human is to have a free will, right? Just like there is no triangle without three sides, you cannot have a human person, a human being, without a will, right? I think that's part of what we are, is a being capable of will. And so you might ask, well, couldn't God have just created a bunch of perfect creatures without a will? I mean, yeah, he could have, I guess, but then you wouldn't be in it, right? The alternative is to be some kind of animal, an inanimate object, a machine, right? But it is not to be a human, right? So God made men with free will. And his desire was for man to love him freely, okay? Well, if that is the case, if there is love, if there is the possibility of love, then there's the possibility of the opposite. There's the potential for unlove, right? The opposite. Well, then, why didn't God create a world without sin and evil? Well, he did. He did. Read through the first couple chapters in the Bible. He did. Evil does not come from God. He made everything good, right? Evil has come about through human freedom, right? Not choosing the good, right? Not choosing what God has provided for him. So that's what you were kind of talking about earlier, Abyan. I'll give a brief corollary here. Peter Kraft also writes, the simplest argument for the existence of free will is observation of how we use words. We praise, blame, command, counsel, exhort, and moralize to each other. Doing these things to robots is absurd. We do not hold machines morally responsible for what they do, no matter how complicated the machines are. If there is no free will, all moral meaning disappears from language and from life. Okay? And so God has created this world where human beings have freedom. They have freedom to choose the good or to not, right? And I would submit to you that that is really the only kind of world where there can actually be love, because love is free, right? It's the free will desire to obtain and possess the good, right? And so, yeah, God could have made the world different, but it would not have us in it, I don't think. Not in the way that you think we would be in it. Okay? All right, let's keep going here. Another aspect I want to touch on is hope. Hope, okay? We talked about this a little bit earlier. God can redeem broken stories, and this life is not the whole story. If we assume that this is all there is, then yeah, it would be pointless and absurd. But this is not the whole story. If it is true that God is not finished with us, he's not finished with the world, that he's going to make all things right, that there's a day of reckoning and reward, that there's a day where evil and suffering is done away with, if that is the case, then there is hope, right? There is hope. Now, I'd caution you, when somebody is actually going through the throes of some kind of suffering, maybe they've lost a loved one, right? Or they've gotten some terminal illness or whatever, right? Don't try to say, hey, God's going to bring some good out of this, right? God's doing this to you because he has some good in mind. Number one, you don't know that. You don't have access to that information, right? You don't have access to why this or that thing happened, right? Yes, we can speak philosophically about it. We can speak, up here in the clouds about this is why God's compatible, why evil doesn't disprove God. This is, blah, 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 right? But that is not a way to reassure somebody, is that, you don't know how this is going to work out, right? Person might just be dead, right? Because of the evil action of somebody else, right? Well, I think what that person needs is somebody to come alongside them, to wrap their arm around them, to comfort them, to be there for them, to bear the weight of that grief with them. That's what they need, right? And if they do have questions, if they do wrestle with certain things, then okay, you talk about that. Now, to wrap this up, God defeated the power of evil at the cross of Christ, okay? And so we know a little bit more of the story, right? We know that the power of evil has been done away with. But he will remove the presence of evil when Christ returns. We're not there yet, right? We have some waiting to do. But we have this future hope. And so, conclusion, just to kind of sum things up, the existence of God is compatible with the reality of evil. The universality of evil itself points to God as the author of the good. And while humanity, through its freedom, has chosen evil, there is hope through Jesus Christ. This life is not the whole story. We know our own stories up to its current point. At least some of us do. I don't even remember what I did yesterday, but no, just kidding. We know our stories, but we don't know what each day brings. But one thing I want to emphasize is that this life, I've said it over and over again, is not the whole story. It's not the end. What we look forward to as the end of evil, pain, and suffering is really, as Lewis writes in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the beginning of chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever and ever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. Because of God, because of Christ, we have so much to look forward to. We have a hope, right? We have a hope, and I think hope is the greatest comfort to suffering and evil. Because when you're in the midst of suffering, the question is, what can I hope in? What can I look to? What hope is there? Well, we have that in Christ Jesus. Let's pray. Lord God, we just thank you for your Son Jesus, who gives us this living hope, who is alive and who will return for us, Lord. And we read in Revelation about how you will do away with the old things and you'll bring in the new. You will wipe away every tear from every eye. There will be no more pain and no more sorrow, right? No more death. We look forward to that day. And may it come soon. But Lord, until then, help us to be people full of hope and love, that we may endure suffering with perseverance, that we may suffer well, that those who see us suffering may glorify your name. This is a difficult question. It's a difficult topic. There's a lot to consider, a lot to think about a billion questions we can't get to. But Lord, help us to wrestle with this question on an individual basis so that we may be better equipped to minister to those who are going through suffering. And help us, Lord, to point people to you, to the great hope. We love you, Lord, and pray this in your name. Amen.